How you guys doing? Ready? Again, how you guys doing? It's awesome to be here in the 9th year of PHX Startup Week on the last day, party. This is one of my favorite times of year, getting to see people come together, people like Heidi who have built the town we live in, and fresh faces who, you have your first idea, very first time starting a company, and all you want to do is learn from the best and become the best. So it's a great place to be. We're going to hear from Heidi in just a moment, but I would love to know who we have in the audience today. Can you raise your hand if you're in ideation, you think you have a cool idea, you haven't really started building a company yet, but you think you might? All right, yes, thank you for being here. All right, how about got a product, maybe some revenue, you definitely have a website, you started selling to people? Okay, we've got a couple. Growth stage? Okay, what are the rest of you up to? Investors. Okay. And community, general startup community. All right. We have a lot of you that did not raise hands. I don't know who you are or what you're doing here, but I hope you're having a great time. And how many of you have heard Heidi speak before? That's what I like to see. Okay, cool. So as mentioned, Dr. Heidi Jannenga, a sports physical therapist, and a darn good one at that, who had managed clinics and found a pain point that she needed to solve, which led into what we get to enjoy today, which is the founding and growth of WebPT. Heidi will tell us a little bit more about it. But importantly, while she's been building and growing an incredible company, she's been one of the most generous founders in the Phoenix community, sharing her story, speaking. When I used to teach at ASU, she would come to my classroom and talk to my students. Heidi shows up, and she shows up for all of us in this community, and on behalf of all of us, thank you for all you've done for the community. You're not supposed to start with tears. I know. I'm afraid I'm going to forget. So, very honored to be here, sharing a stage with you, and excited to, we'll ask you all the hard questions that, Kate's teed up for us. So, for those of you who haven't heard it before, maybe give us a little bit of background, what led to WebPT, and then we'll get into a little bit about how you got your first 10 customers.
Okay, so Sidnee's right. Anybody who asks me what I still do today, I still say I'm a physical therapist first. I was a sports therapist running one of the largest sports medicine practices in the country, right here in Tempe, Arizona, actually. And as a clinic director, I had P&L responsibilities, and in healthcare, if any of you are in healthcare, you know that reimbursement or payment has steadily declined over the years. It's very hard to get paid from insurance companies. And so with your bottom line going down, you want to maintain, your top line going down, your bottom line you want to maintain, you have to look at your expenses. And you also have to transport yourself now 16, 17 years ago, because WebPT is celebrating our 15-year anniversary this year, which is pretty incredible. Thank you. Where the majority of healthcare was still documenting on pen and paper. And so one of our largest expenses was transcription and dictation. We were spending a lot of money to do that, and it would take upward of almost a week to get a note back from the time a patient would enter our door. We would do an evaluation to the time that we could then send that note to the referring physician. So that was just a huge pain point, to your point, that I needed to solve. And so put my head together with a technologist who happened to be my boyfriend at the time, and he had experience in building enterprise-level SaaS software. So we put our heads together, created something that was originally supposed to be just for my practice, iterated on it for about 9 months. It was working. We were getting positive feedback from the therapist in my practice. And some of my colleagues in the area said, hey, what are you doing over there? It's working really well. I'd love to try it. So within the next 6 months, we had 12 practices up and running. And key point is that we charged all of them to make sure that the value of what we had created was actually, they would see the value as well. They all paid for it, liked the software, and so light bulbs started to come on at that point, and we did a little market research, and we found that 80% of therapists in the United States were also having similar problems. also document on pen and paper. So in February of 2008, we launched WebPT. At that point, we had 3 employees, a few contractors who helped build the actual software platform. Sold 5 clinics that first month. Every month after that has been almost, another big sales month. And today in 2023, we hold just over 50% of the market in the U.S. for outpatient orthopedics and outpatient physical therapy. We are will close 2023 probably just shy of 180 million in revenue. We've taken 3 rounds of funding through the past 15 years. The first in 2010 when we were at $1 million run rate. We took $1 million in, gave a small piece of the company up from a local angel group here called Canal Partners. Took that one, turned it into 20 by 2016, 2014, and took in a venture round from Battery Ventures out of Silicon Valley. Rode that, and we gave 51% of the company, so I'm throwing it out here I know you're going to have questions. 51% of the company at that point in time, and continued to drive and lead the business to do a private equity round in 2019 when we sold the business. And I'm still part of the business today, so it's been a really incredible journey that I'm sure we'll have questions from.
Awesome. So I heard 2 really important inflection points early on. One was that it sounds like maybe this gentleman was trying to woo you by building you something that was helpful for you. Did either of you, were you guys having conversations at that point about I could sell this to other people, or were you genuinely building it to solve your problem?
Genuinely building it to solve my problem. It was really, in the moment, it was a heads down, oh my gosh, I need to look good as a clinic director, and this is a huge problem for me, and I was profit sharing in the business, and this would be more money for me.
Okay, so as a teacher, I have to say, learning point number 1, solve a really, really painful problem, because then you had people, I asked you where your first 10 customers came from, people came just knocking on your door because they heard you were fixing the very, very painful problem. So I'm going to guess, because you continue to live introducing yourself as a physical therapist, that you loved that role. Can you talk a little bit about those decisions, and how did you, in what baby steps did you step away from time in the clinic versus time building this and being out in the world?
So we bootstrapped the company from 2006 upon an idea conception to 2010 when we took that first round of funding in, so 4 years. I continued to work in the business full-time and treating patients full-time. I was a clinic director in 2010. In 2010, I stepped down as clinic director mainly because I became pregnant, and I was going to have our daughter, Ava, which I had her in 2011. And we took that round of funding in 2010. And subsequently, obviously, the business at that point needed to ramp up. And so the overachiever that I am, 3 full-time jobs, including being a mom, was not sort of doable. And so something had to go. And reluctantly, I have to say reluctant, because it was probably one of the toughest years, even to date, of my life, of trying to figure out, having to leave a career that I was literally at the top of my game, had really reached a lot of the professional goals that I had set for myself in terms of working with professional athletes, building a book of business of physicians that I worked with, very, very closely, and leading the notably largest sports medicine practice in the country. And so stepping away from that was really hard from an ego perspective, to jump into technology, which I knew nothing about. I'm a clinician. I didn't know the first thing about technology. And so taking that leap of faith was very, very hard. And Anna's also becoming a first-time mom at age 42 was very traumatic, to say the least. So just not being, and balancing, a startup at the same time. I mean, it was a lot of things going on all at the same time. And so that first year was of sort of making this transition was super difficult for me. And there was a real turning point, which I don't remember exactly the conversation. It was probably a culmination of a few conversations, but someone asked me, like, why did you become a physical therapist? And I became a physical therapist because I love to help people. It was like, one of the most common responses for healthcare providers, like, you love helping people. And when I really recognized with what we were doing with WebPT, I exponentially could help more people. More patients were going to be able to be seen. More of my peers could continue to be entrepreneurs and start their own businesses because we were providing a piece of software that they could afford and actually could run their business better. And so it was like this epiphany. It's like, oh my God, I can help even more people with what we're doing, right? And at that point, it sort of changed everything for me as how I sort of wanted to then dive in and truly be all in on WebPT.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So the gentleman who was before you talked a lot about early childhood, like at 10, setting up a little business and building something and iterating on that. Can you share a little bit about, it sounds like you dominate being like top of your game. You excel at the things that you do. Were you building stuff? Were you thinking in an entrepreneurial way through childhood or teenage years? What was on your mind? Did you want to be a marine biologist like most young humans? Or
funny, yes, I did actually. I never took on the title of entrepreneur until it was given to me. I don't know that I was really. I grew up with two immigrant parents who taught me that hard work and doing things that you do really, really well. But I wasn't the one that was, tinkering and taking things apart, putting them back together. I hated selling chocolate bars from door to door when we had to raise money. Like that just wasn't me. But what was me was, I wanted Jordache jeans, and so I went and mowed everybody's lawn in the neighborhood to make money. Like I knew the value of transaction of here's what I want, here's how I'm going to get it. Like I'm going to take it on myself to try to figure out how to get it. And so I don't know how that translates into the universal definition of entrepreneur, but and then I'll also just say from a leadership perspective, like I have always gravitated to. I was an athlete. I played basketball and multiple sports in high school, and somehow was always nominated or brought to the level of captain of my teams. And so the interworking with people tend to like what I have to say, and I was always a leader by example. So that hard work and ethic that my parents have instilled in me, I think exudes out to others. And that gravitas, I think, is something that has also been very helpful in building a company and kind of getting people to follow your vision.
Absolutely, and you've done an excellent job of that. For those of you who know WebPT, you've probably seen a lot about the culture that's been built. We can dig into that a little bit later too. I know people love to hear about fundraising and what that process is like. I imagine each round was a whole different adventure. Can you talk us through a little bit about how you decided when to go after money, what path, and how you ended up, if there were any stub toes or learning moments along the way that people could benefit from?
The first round was, let me just say, at no point did we ever need money. I think it's a really important critical factor, meaning we didn't need money to stay in business. There was never a point where it was like, if we don't raise $500,000, we're going to go out of business. That was never, ever happened. And it's not something that I personally believe is like the whole bootstrapping and product market fit and getting to a place of revenue is critically important before you even try to go for funding. And especially, as someone mentioned earlier in the question, how has the funding atmosphere changed? It is back to where it was when we were raising money. It is about your metrics. It is about having true product market fit, having a real purpose to your business, and having customers that want to buy. your product. It's no longer the vaporware, and there's a lot of diligence that's happening and a lot of caution that's being taken before they write checks. In the early stage, our reason for raising funds was because timing of in the healthcare space was moving toward at a faster pace than we were able to grow with the revenue that we were generating on a monthly basis. So the Affordable Care Act was passed, which mandated providers to move to digital documentation. And although physical therapists were not part of that mandate, we didn't get any incentives to take on an EMR. You're just moved along with the crowd, right? That if you can't be handing a doctor who's been mandated to create digital documentation a handwritten note, that's just, you can't do that. So we were kind of pulled along, and so timing was really important. That if we weren't able to do the things that we needed to do, that we probably would miss this wave. And so that's why we decided to go for the early round funding. I was pregnant at the time. So we were a husband and wife team. There's 2 X's right there. But our SaaS metrics were off the charts. We were already at that $1 million sweet spot of run rate. We were in a time period, again, timing a lot of times is everything. If you take yourself back, if any of you have been here since around this time, it was a horrible economic downturn. And people were looking to figure out ways. This was the early stage of startup world in Arizona, right? Technology wasn't a thing. It was real estate and, all the C's. And so we were one of the prettiest girls in the room, right? And so we had unanimous vote from the Arizona Tech Investors group, the angel group initially. And we ended up going with 1 investor instead of 25, who ended up just coming in and taking the full round, which also is a whole other story we can talk about as far as your cap table.
Did you have anyone, this is your first time raising money, did you have anyone mentoring you? Did you have someone you could call on to say, what do I need to be thinking about when I'm looking at this term sheet? How do I pitch? Or maybe you came to that very naturally from your history of leadership?
No. This was a completely new world. So we, and the tech startup world there was no tech startup world. This is why you all are here today, and that Startup Week exists, right? We actually came to a group called ASU Prep, which was essentially a starter group for, small, ASU seems to be at the cutting edge of a lot of things, but they were similar to this, small or startup AZ, similar to that, small groups of people who had ideas or startups that were and they were teaching you how to put a pitch deck together, how to, what you should be thinking about in pitching to investors, things like that. So, and then I will just say Paul Winandy was the leader of the Arizona Tech Investors at the time, and he connected with us, loved our story, loved the business, really wanted us to get invested in, and sort of took a liking to us and helped us along the way as well. And actually, we rewarded him with being our CEO at the time.
Did you really just give 1 pitch?
We gave 3 pitches, in front of everyone. So there were lots of meetings that happened after that initial pitch. So we pitched to the Canyon Angels down in Tucson. We pitched to the Tech Investors, and there was one other group. I think the New Mexico Angels or something. Okay. Which is really all that existed back then.
Sure. And maybe contrast that to the next round. And how did you guys come to know your battery, and what was that like? Did you go on a whole roadshow of pitches, or was that also a direct intro in 1 round?
No, it's a totally different scenario. Somehow, when you are a fast-growing company and you have that hockey stick of growth that is happening, somehow investors find out about you. So, we got lots of calls along those years, and Battery being one of them. So we had befriended them for a couple of years, meaning we just kept in touch and shared our information of maybe one day we'll go seek out investment. And they were super helpful. It opened doors to introducing us to the CEO of Netflix, for example, because we were trying to scale our business, and little interesting things that we just sort of took all of that information and learning along the way. But when we actually really decided to go to do actually an investment round, we went all in on the investment banker, the traditional way of doing it. We probably did, I don't know, we met with probably at least 50 to 60 different investors across the country. I want to say it was a waste of time. It was an incredibly interesting learning experience, but for the most part, it was a waste of time. In terms of, not, again, product market fit, investor entrepreneur fit is a thing as well, right? And we just met a bunch of people, and it was really interesting learning to know exactly what people are looking for, and there were definite no's right out the gate when you just walk into a room, you're like, this is never happening. As a woman, it was very interesting because I was 99.9% of the time the only woman in the room. So you meet with 4 or 5 other people, and even as a founder, usually they were talking to, the 2 men in the room, my co-founder and our CEO, and I hardly ever got questions, which was always interesting, even though they would always defer to me and answering most of the questions. The questions would still go to them. It was an interesting scenario. But at the end of the day, we came to the end. We narrowed it down to 3 top investors. And, we honestly had valuation stars in our eyes. And we initially picked, without signing on the dotted line, the investor that had given us the biggest valuation. And before we decided to move forward, we had a team meeting with Canal, us, and the 2 founders and our CEO. And I just raised my hand because there was just the gut feeling that just didn't feel right. And I raised it, and lo and behold, there were other people in the room that had that same feeling, that they just, but dollar signs talk, especially to an investor. And so we pulled back, and we actually decided not to do that. We did a little more diligence on some of the questions that we all had that we just weren't saying out loud. And we decided not to go with that top tier investor. And we ended up going with number 2, which was Battery. And it was, again, one of those pivotal moments in the business, probably the best decision we made in that particular moment.
Okay, so learning moment to listen to your gut. It's probably telling you the right thing. And then I missed a very important one, which is metrics talk. So when you build a business that actually solves that very painful pain, and the dollar signs show from a revenue standpoint that it's a lot easier to raise money versus, like you were saying, I need that $1 million to make it through. You were in the power seat both times because you had the revenue, which is awesome. So back on the culture stuff a little bit. So going through size growth, right, from 10 employees to 20 to in the hundreds is one of the greatest challenges on a culture. And also, I think the fundraising process, right, like people are like, what does this mean that we, raised this money and then venture money and all that? So tell us a little bit about the approach you took, and I imagine you started to instill culture probably from the very beginning, but speak a little bit to that and any cool things you learned as you grew.
Well, I mean, it's easy to define in retrospect. Things are going so fast when you're in it, right? And as I look back, as all of you are in early stage, the culture is defined by you as a founder and your own values and how you run your day-to-day, how you interact, how you communicate, the transparency you have, how you treat people, right? All of that is values, right? And between myself and our co-founder, that's where those values eventually started. And when we took our first round of funding in, we had 17 employees, and it was truly a family. My daughter was a baby, and we would have a little room in the back, and I would go breastfeed for an hour and come back, and like people would go in to see her. She has aunties and uncles that are still in the business today. Like, it was a true family atmosphere. When we took that next round of funding in, we grew significantly. Within the next 6 months, we had more than double the number of employees in the company. And we felt this culture shift, like it was just different, right? People, when you're hiring that fast, like the translation without having an actual process to translate that culture or, how you do work in your business, without that truly defined, it was difficult and it wasn't happening well. And so we took a moment to every year we would have a full company stand up, and this particular year we just kind of took a couple of hours to say, what does it mean to be a part of WebPT? And we filled up a giant whiteboard of all these, answers to questions. Who do we want to be? Who do we want to be? What types of people do we want in this business? What is it going to take to actually reach our vision? And out of those 40 people in that room, define our culture in terms of language and words, and we put those in, which are still, I'm so proud of today as a 15-year company, that those are still the values of the business and truly the rock and the foundation that our decisions are made off of.
And so after you defined it, was it pretty stuck through all the other layers of growth?
Yeah, so it was, but it wasn't, right? So it's an intentional, something intentional that happens with everything that you do. Like, those values are part of our job descriptions. It's a part of we call it our culture cruise when you join WebPT. Like, you go through culture cruise. It's part of the onboarding process of every new employee. Like, it's literally, you're indoctrinated into the business. And hopefully the values of the business also resonate with your own values, so it's not like it's you're one person at work and another person at home, right? That's part of the whole interview process, that there's alignment on those values. It's part of you're evaluated on your performance reviews. Like, our values are listed on the performance reviews. So nowhere are they just, words on a wall and that everybody looks at it and laughs. Like, it's truly part of the fabric of the business, right? Even up to our CEO, on purpose, exactly, with intention.
So as a leader and as someone that those inside and outside of WebPT have gotten to look to you on this journey, we see in the news a lot of interesting stories about founders, whether it's on the, burnout, mental breakdown journey, or on making interesting choices to get yourself in hot water. What were some moments that were really hard for you, or how did you keep central to what mattered to you when there's a lot of pressure to, maybe not for you guys because you're doing so great, but maybe fake the numbers a little bit or push a little harder than you really have the energy to do? How did you stay in what looks like, at least from our standpoint on the outside, a pretty steady, true to who you are person?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say that, on the facade of everything looks fine. Internally, there are definitely lots of up and down. I mean, my co-founder turned into my husband, which we launched the company in February 2008 and got married in May of 2008, and subsequently got divorced in 2017. So the business has, outlived the relationship, and so I guess in between, part of that was all going on while we're growing a business, right? And so there's something to be said about just as a leader having to make sure that you are there because you need to rally the troops, and you are there for the purpose of the business, and there are a lot of responsibilities that come with that. But there's also something to say for the vulnerability of understanding and being a real person. And I think and that's part of our culture of people say that all the time, like, I feel like I can just be myself in this business. And Like, I think that starts with the transparency and being real people even at the top. And there's not this echelon of executive leaders that never talk to, the entry level employee. Like, we're all in this together. So I don't know. It goes back to values. I don't know how to say it because it's just who we are, who I am, right? I can only speak for myself, but that sort of way of thinking is also when we look for a new leader. We're on our third CEO now. When we interview, like, that has to be part of their ethos, because it is such there's going to be a culture clash with how this business has been going and what has been part of the success. I guess that's also one of the things I'm most proud of through those 2 rounds of funding, VC and private equity, is the value they place on culture. And I know people think that it's just a buzzword or that, it's fluff. Yes, we have all the metrics to back it up, but the value that they place on that part of our business has been in, like, over the top, like, support financially, and they talk about it, right? It's part of our board meetings. Like, it's part of our board deck of talking about our people and culture and how that's actually going. So I can't emphasize that enough. Like, if that's truly a part of your foundation, it should be. Like, it'll be supported throughout your journey.
I love that is true, that happened. I mean, it's easy to see you have great culture. That means people stick around. That means you've got good talent. That means the business does better. It's great to hear. I'm sure along the path there were times when you were like, man, should we just wrap this thing up, or should we sell it sooner? Should we do things along the way so I can maybe go back to physical therapy, or I can choose something else, or maybe there was there's entrepreneurship is all these really high highs, really low lows, right? Was there ever a moment like that, or what was one of the toughest that you could kind of, for anybody who's maybe in that tough moment or about to be in it or has been recently?
I think maybe because I'm a physical therapist, and the thing that we built was for my own industry. Like, it's still me, right? I don't know that I shared that really tough year of transition. I think that was probably the toughest year that I've ever had outside of now. It's really like I always get told that you're a unicorn in terms of staying with the business for 15 years through 3 different rounds of funding. Like, I don't know how many stages of the business you want to count. Most people love the startup phase if you're an entrepreneur, or they like the middle stage, right, of the fundraising and all of that. Now we're kind of in this enterprise, private equity world. And I'll be fully transparent, this is not the fun part for me. Like, it's just not. And now also, there's other things that I've spawned off to do in working with, other entrepreneurs, being an investor, starting my own foundation, which we're providing scholarships for physical therapists and underrepresented backgrounds. Like, the success that I've had with WebPT allows me to even think bigger and doing more things for the community in my industry. Which is, again, at the core of why we started WebPT in the first place. There's other options for me now to be able to take advantage of and pour my heart into. WebPT will always be my firstborn. It's just now 18 years old and able to stand on its own, and I don't need to be there to hold its hand anymore. So I honestly, yes, are there moments when you're just like, why are we doing this? This is insane. Like, I'm not sleeping, like sure, but always going back to the purpose. And then I'll just say, talking to our customers, like we call them members because it's part of our community. Like, anytime I ever needed that boost, it was going to a trade show or, calling one of our members to talk to them and hearing the impact that our platform is having on their business, that they wouldn't be in business anymore should they not have started using ours. I mean, that just reels you right back in every single time, back to the why. Yeah. So on this journey of building, fundraising, all this stuff, and deciding what role you're going to serve in, and if we want to talk a little bit about, at least early stage, how you decided about equity split or anything you're comfortable sharing about cap table.
can you walk us through the roles you've played, how you came to that, you and your co-founders and early employees, how you decided who would or would not be CEO and who would or would not serve certain roles? Maybe speak to that. I know that can be really challenging from an ego perspective and also from an experience perspective in the early days.
Yeah, early days, we had a very flat organization. Between the co-founder and I, our domains were very clear. He was a technologist. I was the subject matter expert. There was very little overlap outside of the business. And, we had a 50-50 partnership, and that's how we ran the business. We were always humble enough to know what we did well and the areas that we were lacking in to hire people into those, like marketing and other areas. And so early on, that was pretty easy. As the business got bigger and you have more pressures from investors to have institutional leadership in, it became a little bit harder in those roles. That was part of the reason that Brad ended up leaving the business. But for better or for worse, subject matter expertise is a die-hard position that unless you want to leave, like most of the time you won't get pulled out of the business. Like they can't live without you. And so fortunate for me, but also because of other skills, not just that, operationally and whatnot, of what I brought to the business, being the face of the company, connection to the customer, product. I still today work very closely with our product team in terms of what we're building and how we build it. And so initially we never had a CEO until we brought Paul in to be the CEO. We didn't call ourselves, we didn't have the C titles in the early stages. Once we took that early round in, we had titles. And then, then at that point it was really stages. So Paul knew how to grow a company from 1 to 20. When we reached 20 and we brought the new investors in, it was time to bring somebody in who knew how to grow a company from 20 to 100 million. I mean, it's very different. And now we have a new CEO that's going to take us from 100 to 300, right? And so it is very different in the stages of the business. Longevity for me is because I love learning, and I have been intrigued by every sort of segment and part of the journey. And so, yeah, and also adding value, obviously, throughout the different areas.
And so, as you're growing different product offerings, are you still staying true to serving PT field? Have you thought about growing into, or maybe you already have, into other segments? Or how do you make decisions on what product you release and what path you go down?
It's a really great question. So market size is always something you're going to be asked about from an investor perspective. How big is the market? Like, how much potential do you have to grow? And initially, when we did our first sort of round of funding, it was like a $1.5 billion market. And everyone was like, well, what are the adjacent markets that you're going to need to go in? Because that seems really small, even though we were the first EMR and it was 100% of the market that we could go capture, right? And so since then, niche is the thing, right? Everybody loves the niche markets, and it is all about being the winner in your category. And so we're the thing, right? Because we are niche in PT and we are the clear winner in the industry. And so every round has been about that since then, of continuing to push, market share in terms of we're over 50% now. Like the goal of Warburg Pincus, which is our private equity firm, is to get to 80%. They have other EMRs and other areas that have achieved that, and they believe that we can do the same, which we also believe we can do the same. Tell me your question again, because I had one other piece. I've forgotten my question. Oh, sorry. I forgot my answer. What's that? Adjacent verticals. Yeah. So sorry. Yes, thank you. So we have been asked that question every time through every round. Like, are there adjacent verticals that you could replicate what you've done in, like, let's say chiropractic, for example, or today, when we first started, we were very much PT. Today, we call it rehab therapy, whereas PT, OT, and speech. So OT and speech are much smaller niches, but a lot of times they are working together in the same practice, and so we have to serve those 3 markets. So we have expanded in that way. More importantly, it's about not only market share, but wallet share. So we have expanded our product line to be able to have expanded wallet share from each individual of our customers, and that's how we've been able to grow our TAM. And even in the big picture of PT, like outpatient orthopedic is where we live, but there's also, lots of other areas where PTs work, and so there's other potentials, whether it's, acute care, which is probably not real, but we connect with a lot of the big EMRs that way, but, neuro and pediatrics, like all the different specialties that we could also play in is now how we've also continued to expand our TAM, total addressable market.
So as you're expanding products and reaching other markets, how do you keep your eye on what's happening in the overall healthcare market? How do you stay top of your game? And where do you spend your time when it's not, directly in the company, so that you can continue to have your eye on things? And if you want to talk a little bit into AI in that world, feel free, but whatever you're seeing.
Yeah, so first and foremost, listening to our customers. They are in it. They are, especially as consolidation is happening, we see enterprise groups as well as small and medium-sized businesses, right? Very different problems that there are to solve. And so there's never a shortage of ideas. I'll just put it that way, in terms of, it's really just how do we hone those into really solve it with technology and solve it within our, the way that we build our platform. And then for me, it's still, I talk to our customers a lot, trade shows, but more than that, it's expanding outside of what else is going on outside of the healthcare industry. Healthcare tends to be 5 to 10 years behind, and so AI, for example, we have the largest contiguous data set in the world of PT, and so there are so many opportunities for us to, GPTize a lot of our data and what we're doing, so that's really definitely on the horizon for us as well.
That's exciting. All right, I would like to open it up hands just went straight up. We got 10 minutes here to take a few questions.
Yeah, I got the first one. My question is about the decision to sell majority stake to private equity. I think from most founders' perspectives, they don't know much about it, and what they do know or hear is a little bit negative. You think PE, kind of soulless, all that stuff, which definitely does not fit with your vibe and culture and all the stuff that you're doing. So I'd just love to hear more about how you all kind of came to that decision, and what you've learned from it, and just anything you can share.
So we gave up 51% of the company in 2016 when we took our second round in VC, and it was a really difficult decision. But it was really about trust in the VC firm and Battery that we had connected with their general partner who was going to be on our board. We had known them now for 3 years. Their vision connected with our vision, right? They were true, and you got to take them for their word, but we took them for their word after getting to know them for a time period that we did, and that they are not operators, that they were truly going to back us in our vision and what we wanted to accomplish, and they remained true to that word. Part of it also was, all of our net wealth was tied up in the business at that point in time, and this was a way for us to de-risk our decisions that we were making for the company at the time. It's really hard, and I'm sure all of you understand, and we were at 20 million in revenue, right? We were taking decent salaries now, and but we had put ourselves into a lot of debt to build the business to that point in time. And I don't like being in debt. That's part of my own ethos. I don't take credit. I pay off my credit card every month. That's just who I am. So that was a real risk for me. We then decided to take some money off the table. What everybody told us was, be happy with whatever you just made, because what you just said is potentially true, that the business can go in the toilet after this. Like, you have to be happy with whatever you just made. We didn't believe that. Like, we knew we were going to do something bigger, but that was really a lot of the reason. It was very personal. And at that point too, like, in order for us to grow, we needed to do acquisitions. And we just we couldn't grow to the level that we wanted to continue to grow without making acquisitions, and the speed that we wanted to grow. Yeah. Oh.
And batteries.
Private equity.
Classic VC firm.
Yeah. So what was the decision to sell private equity? Well, part of it was because Battery wanted to. I mean, they're 51% of the company at that point in time, right? So, and also, we were 4 years in. They actually didn't care. It was really a collaborative decision to make. I mean, me still being the founder of the business, like, we talked a lot probably 6 months going back and forth. Should we, shouldn't we? I mean, timing of the market is important. We got a smoking deal. But we did the very same thing that we did when we chose Battery. We had a short list that Battery knew, right, based on our culture and what we wanted to accomplish, and also the fact that we wanted more runway to still prove out our vision. We had a great leadership team in place. And so we vetted all of these different firms. We had a lot of interest, and chose Warburg because of similar ethos to Battery in terms of not being operators and really letting us run. And that's been fairly true. I'll say fairly true, right? I mean, now we're coming up on 5 years. I mean, COVID changed everything, unfortunately, for lots of reasons. And now, the market, the atmosphere is a lot different from, they're under a lot of pressure as well from their stakeholders, but it's a whole other topic.
Who else has questions for Heidi? Don't be afraid. She told me she'd answer anything.
Did anything materially change in your company once you sold the 50, like once you weren't the majority holder anymore? And did it affect your day-to-day, or was it only the big decisions where it really matters?
From Battery, it was in 2016. It was really only big decisions and board decisions that really affected anything day to day. I will say in 2019, it's really hard to say because we did our deal in October of 2019 with Warburg, and then the pandemic hit. And I would say through the pandemic, they've been extremely supportive in terms of, extremely supportive in everything we needed. But coming out of COVID, right, they're like, hey, you promised us something in 2019, like, you better get your shit together because time's a ticking, right? And so now it's kind of more traditional private equity, like fire is under us and you better perform. And I mean, we're performing, but just maybe not to the 19 standards yet, but we'll get there. But patience is waning, I guess I'll be saying. And it's normal, right? I mean, it's just the world that we live in today and that what we signed up for. So day to day, I would say, has changed a bit in terms of we've turned over our entire executive team over the last 18 months as well. Again, preparing for this next stage, which is probably about 18 months overdue. Maybe not overdue, but it probably would have happened sooner should the pandemic not have sort of put everything on pause. And that's pretty typical as well when private equity comes in. So, in that case, I guess in that sort of way, it's changed quite a bit.
Given that culture is such a big part and a big focus, and I fully agree, the culture is the heartbeat, and if you don't keep to that, you're going to go under. How do you keep to, like, going through all these phases, the culture changes, as you yourself mentioned, like, the first breaking points that you saw in that was going from the startup phase to really bringing in, doubling the team. But as as you're growing into these, like changing the executive team, that has an impact on culture. How do you keep a beat with the culture, let alone help keep it where you intended for it to be in alignment with your values?
So I'll say personally, I think part of it, and I think our executive team would say the same, is having the founder still in the business at this stage of the game has been a huge piece of that. Someone who is connected to those values, who lives and breathes them, and they were born out of you, it has a lot to do with it. So that's not typically normal. So I think there's a lot of change that happens with new executive teams. You don't have that historical, institutional kind of values that are still there to reinforce them. So that's part of it. But more than that, I think it's the values it's culture is not just about the values. It's how you do work. How you do work actually changes over time, right? We have many more spans and layers in the business, right? But having career pathing, having, putting people first. Like, we have all these Slack channels and communities and groups that people can interact with. Like, we used to bring our dog to work. Well, we don't bring our dog to work anymore, but we have, a Slack channel called Topper Times, which is our dog's name. And, everybody posts pictures of their pets. And, that kind of, fun components, are still based on the foundation of the business. Does that make sense? And those historical things that still kind of bleed through the business even today I don't know, I think we probably have maybe 15 or 18, maybe 25 people who have been with us for more than 12 years that are still in the business. When we have over 800 employees now, right? So it's those historical things that continue, but more than that, it's how you treat people, right? It's how you, the transparency in financials, that's still true to who we are today. We have company stand-ups every quarter, and our CFO is, out there sharing with the business. Here's how we did. Here's true stand-ups. Some of those cultural norms, I think, that are withstanding time.
Yeah, and last one. So you mentioned your partner or co-founder that eventually you no longer were working with. What tips would you give to folks who have relationships with friends or people they're dating or whatever else it might be, and how to protect and prepare for that inevitable conclusion? Where there are changes in the business and who's working in it.
So those are some of the toughest things in the beginning that you have to draw the line between friendship, relationship, and at the end of the day, it is business. When we first drew up our first incorporated, who owns the business in your first cap table, I was 100% adamant that it was going to be 50% you, 50% me. We're both in this together, right? Most people would say, no, one person has to have 51% because someone's got to be the decision maker. For me, that was a no-go from the start. And every round through that period, we had separate cap tables for each one of us as founders, right? So it was very legalized, very clearly defined from the get-go. I will say in the beginning, we had no idea what the value of our shares were. And even our very first employee, we gave significant shares to. And we had to have some very difficult discussions when we actually went from an LLC to an incorporated company after that first round of funding to say, I'm sorry that we might have thought that this is, or you might have thought that this is how much of the business we had to negotiate, right? And it was a tough conversation, but at the end of the day, it was, do you want a larger piece of a smaller pie, or do you want a bigger piece of a smaller pie, or a smaller piece of a big pie? And someone he was all in on the business and knew the opportunity that was in front of us, and basically took down shares. But it was very tough conversations, and so I guess learning lesson is know the value of your equity, or try to understand the value of equity, because it is what you must protect, from the very, very beginning. Equity must be, it's so easy to give away shares when they don't actually have value.
Important lesson. Quick little plug there. Y Combinator has a great video. You search YC Safe Note shares or something. That this woman talks you through exactly what happens to ownership as you go through different rounds of funding. Because in the beginning, it does feel maybe a little bit like play, like monopoly money and all that fun stuff. So that's a good one if you need to go on that journey. So thank you so much, Heidi. In closing, do you mind sharing a little bit, like, what are you most excited about right now, WebPT related or not? What are you working on that's really lighting your fire?
Yeah, well, WebPT is cruising. We're doing great. Lots of interesting stuff happening on the product side, feature side. But I mean, what really is floating my boat right now is my foundation. It's called Rizing-Tide, R-I-Z-I-N-G. With my financial success that has happened over the multiple transactions, I've been able to put aside an endowment to create the scholarship program for underrepresented therapists that are either going through their DPT, their Doctorate of Physical Therapy program, or residency students after they've gotten their DPT. And I mean, we have 21 scholars now, and they light my fire, man. These are amazing young PTs with so much passion and excitement about the industry, and so it's really now paying it forward to the next generation of PTs, and hopefully some cool entrepreneur out there.
Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.